After the events of this past week, I think it's safe to say Missouri is officially the recruiting story of the year in 2024. So let's talk about the latest edition, Charles Bass, and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tiger football and basketball. Later on today's program, I'm going to ask the Scoutmaster Brian Smith if he thinks this moment for Missouri football recruiting is simply a blip or a sign of something more sustainable for the future. But you know what? Before we start the program, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I have to say, not just with the addition of Charles Bass, but it really put it all into perspective for me that, to me, Missouri is clearly the recruiting story of the year in college football right now. Because if you think about it, who was really the last team to actually crash the party, the blue blood recruiting party, if you will? By the 1980s, 1990s, when I first started paying attention to this sport, really the blue blood type programs have been pretty well set in stone. Now, if you go all the way back to 2002, the first available data that we have from Rivals.com, their rankings of high school recruits, well, you'll notice that, for example, Alabama actually had fallen out at that point. They were only, and I would say only a little bit sarcastically, but for Alabama, that's pretty low. Bama was the 30th ranked high school recruiting class that year. So what you see is, yes, those blue blood type programs can fall out occasionally, but once they have a coach established, it's kind of tough for them to fall out. And in fact, just to put this in perspective, now with Charles Bass in the fold over at Rivals.com, Missouri has the 11th best recruiting class for 2025. Well, let's look at the teams that are ranked ahead of the Tigers there. You're looking at, in order from lowest to highest, we're talking 10-1 here. LSU, Miami, Florida, Texas A&M, Penn State. Let me know when you don't get to us in a pretty historically great program here. Oklahoma, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oregon, Ohio State, and Alabama. So here's the thing. Other than Oregon there, these are the types of teams that have been among the blue blood programs, national championship contenders for the top high school recruiting class, really practically every year. Those are the types of teams that are right there recruiting for that type of talent. So again, Oregon, to me, they're the only team that has really broken into that party over my lifetime of following college football. And you know what? Oregon has even had moments where it's bounced in and out too. Certainly there was a bit of a transition there post Chip Kelly. And, you know, a team like UCLA has had a couple years inside the top 10 as well. But ultimately for the Bruins, speaking of Chip Kelly, that was just a blip. And again, Missouri's class now ranked either 11th or 13th, basically, depending on where you look. If this is not the best class in Mizzou football history, it's pretty darn close. So we're kind of beyond 2025 in terms of actually looking at the big picture. It's going to be a great class for the Tigers. Certainly some important players to close this out. But the real question is, can Missouri stay there? And again, I'm going to ask Brian Smith what he thinks about that question here later in the show. So let's move on specifically now to Charles Bass, a kid from East St. Louis, class of 2025. According to him and the Tigers, he's likely to man the star position, at least at first, that Dalen Carnell is the starter for Missouri. 6'2", 185 is the top 100 player from East St. Louis. Again, 6'2", 185. This is something I've talked a little bit about. I'd say the Tigers will probably like to get Bass into that 210, maybe 220-pound range. That tends to be where they like to get all of their strong safeties and indeed their linebackers for the most part these days too. And considering Bass just finished up his junior year of high school, that's not a ton of weight to add, quite honestly. It really isn't. So nothing to worry about there whatsoever. One thing I will note, he played mostly strong safety, I would say, and slot corner in high school based on his film. You saw him line up at linebacker on one snap, but basically he seems like a kid who can do just a little bit of everything. So he does seem well suited for that Dalen Carnell star position, a guy who's a good hitter and seems to have good instincts no matter where he is lined up on the field. Good player in coverage and also pretty good at the line of scrimmage at all, sniffing out screen passes and making some pretty impressive hits while he did it. By the way, Bass, a kid who picked up an offer from Missouri for the first time nearly 2 years ago, also took official visits to Arkansas and Illinois with notable offers from Michigan, LSU, and others. But again, it seemed like the Razorbacks and the Illini were the biggest competition for Bass toward the end, a kid who seems like maybe he wanted to stick around home a little bit based on those final lists of official visits. But again, Charles Bass really solidifying what I believe is going to be the best class in Mizzou history. If it's not going to be by much in terms of rankings. I can promise you that. So again, while Missouri right now is the absolute story of recruiting in college football in 2024, only time will tell if this is a blip on the radar or something more sustainable. And coming up, let's talk to the Scoutmaster, Brian Smith, about the latest Missouri additions, including Lamont Rogers, Donovan Olugbode, and Jayvan Boggs, as well as some, not only that, a guy, Jack Lange, an offensive tackle Missouri picked up recently. Hey, Lange, some very high praise for him coming from Brian Smith as well. But you know what? Before we get there, I got to talk about eBay Motors, where passion, drive, and patience is the winning formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. And once again, it's Brian Smith joining me, the Scoutmaster here at the Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, a perfect time to bring Brian in. A lot of stuff happening with Missouri and high school recruiting lately. Brian, let's just go in order of most recent here. And certainly in terms of the biggest name, the most recent big name, Lamont Rogers, literally and figuratively a big name here. Texas offensive lineman. What do you think about Rogers?
That is a behemoth of a human being. Can play right or left tackle. Either way, with Jack Lange being the other tackle recruit, that'll be the best combination Missouri's arguably signed in their history, I would imagine. I think Lange can be as good as any tackle in the country.
Wow.
That is a power player, though. Like Lamont, he is an animal. this is the kind of kid, if you're going to compete with Georgia, you got to have, because this is the kid that Georgia would take. I look at the cohort more than anything else, and that's a kid that, Texas wanted, Oklahoma wanted, Georgia wanted, Alabama, etc. That's a great sign. And then just watching the film, he is a downhill power blocker that kind of reminiscent of 1980s and 90s SEC football. Now, he can still move, don't get me wrong, and pass protect, but I want him going downhill as much as possible and then pulling around once in a while. He is going to be a dominant run blocker.
Yeah, not only does he have the requisite size to be just a really big-time prospect at that position, 6'8", I believe, 300-plus pounds he's listed. I was almost just as impressed by his basketball film, Brian. The guy can really move.
Oh, really? I need to go watch that.
It's impressive. He's not just a space eater out there in the paint. They'd throw in the ball and he's making some moves out there. As somebody who loves basketball too, I was duly impressed with Lamont Rogers.
It's a good sign when a big man is able to even be a part of the rotation on a high school basketball team. But if he's one of their upper echelon players, that means he has feet. Yeah, you can't hide on a basketball court. You cannot.
Right.
So that is a great sign, because somebody his size, when they can move, there's not much you can do with them.
Yeah, I thought I saw a little bit of a mean streak on his film too, which I always like to see out of my linemen. What do you think?
There's no doubt. He likes to run on to a guy, get him, bury him, and fall on him. That is not unintentional. Let's not kid ourselves. I'd rather he stay on his feet, but I understand. So whatever the case is, he pancakes guys constantly. And for those that don't know, he's playing in the greater Dallas area. He's playing against dudes. So when he gets a kid that it's not very good and he should bury him, he does. When he's playing against somebody, it's a good player, he holds his own and wins the rep. So not many guys are going to handle him at the prep level. I get that, but it's dominant. There's a reason he's recruited the way he is.
Well, speaking of offensive linemen, another guy, Keiton Jones, this time out of the state of Kansas. I think he's in some ways similar to Rogers in that they fit a nice physical profile for sure. I don't know about Jones in basketball, I'll admit, but at 6'5", 300, not quite as tall as Rogers, of course, but I did see a mean streak there too. What did you see? What have you seen from Jones in your studies?
I think he's a kid that's another power player, probably better suited to guard than what I would say Rogers is. But again, downhill, we're going to beat up on you. This is what you have to do if you're going to compete against Bama, Georgia, LSU. Those are the three schools traditionally in the SEC that matter the most. All of a sudden, it's not just the skill guys at Missouri. They're getting the kids that those schools want in the trenches.
Right.
Things kind of requisite size, power, and demeanor. Your point about being meaner guys, just physically dominant, you're not going to win playoff games, especially if you got to go on the road to play at Bama or something. Good luck. If you don't have the ability to get 3rd and 1s just with power football. This is the kind of kid you can get. By the way, it's bizarre. He's from Kansas. I don't think of Kansas as O-line recruiting or anything else. He's one of a couple really good linemen this year from that state. But this is a player that can play early in the SEC because he's got all the physical tools. Now, he's got technique to clean up. He plays too high and stuff like that. But he's running over guys, and that's the bottom line. And again, walking in at 320, that's a kid Missouri can work with.
Yeah, especially I think Missouri's done a nice job, especially with their recent offensive line coach hire there. Brandon Jones seems like he knows what he's doing. So, yeah, to me, just give you some guys with that requisite size, maybe a little mean streak. Let them coach them up. Hopefully you hit a high batting average there. And well, since you brought up the skill players, let's talk about the receivers. Donovan Olugbode out of IMG Academy, a receiver. Man, a big-time prospect you just don't see Missouri typically getting out of the state of Florida. Him and Jayvan Boggs as well. Let's start with Olugbode. What are your thoughts on him?
I asked him recently how you pronounce his name. It's Olugbode.
Olugbode. You know what? I think I was saying that earlier, and then I choked when I was talking with you. So I'll be honest with you.
Everybody, once he gets there to the stadium, nobody's going to pronounce it.
I was going to say, we'll all figure it out if he's good at Missouri. We'll figure it out quickly.
He will be good. Really, really good route runner. Has great hands. Smart kid. Very easygoing guy. Anybody can get along with him. And he just works hard, man. Carnell Tate, the sign with Ohio State from IMG, is from Chicago. That he knew Olugbode, and he suggested to IMG, hey, you need to get this kid down here. They were right by sending him down. He's been a major player for one of the best high school programs in the country. And quite frankly, he's a guy that could have went to numerous schools, turned down the in-state schools and other SEC programs to go to Mizzou. Again, this is not normal for them. Like you said, getting kids out of Florida is one thing. Getting a prominent kid out of IMG is a whole nother deal.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. They haven't got one of the upper echelon IMG kids before, have they?
Not to my knowledge. No, I don't think so.
So this is an important door to crack open. When I go to their practices, I'm standing on the sidelines with coaches that wear things like Auburn Tigers, Miami Hurricanes, Wisconsin. It's all the Power 5 schools are watching. Right. There's a reason. There's 10 plus coaches at some of these practices. That's an important thing. And last point with him, he's refined enough. He can probably play early for Missouri. He's got really good route running skills.
Well, it's interesting. It was the same thing I said about Olugbode earlier, too, is that to me, I thought he looked like – honestly, I thought him and Boggs both look like unusually good technicians just in terms of route running and that type of deal for guys who are just completed their junior years in high school.
That is a really good point. Boggs, I know as well. He's a kid that did really well at the Under Armour event earlier this spring. He just knows how to use body position as well as any receiver in this class. He had like 1,500 yards receiving last year in Florida. Okay, the high school he's at is a tradition-rich, dominant program. They won state in their division. He had a tremendous game against St. Thomas Aquinas, which in the last 30 years, conservatively, is one of the top 5 programs in the nation. He was the guy they couldn't stop, and they had 4 DBs that went on to play college football. So, like, he knows what he's doing. But he's a big-bodied, strong kid with tremendous hands. The best catch at the Under Armour event this spring was a one-handed catch. The DB was on him, had his arm pinned. He just went up and snagged it with one hand on a bomb, and everybody went nuts. Like, he has very, very special skills that one cannot teach. The hands, the body positioning, like he understands how to stack guys. I would bet very highly that Boggs plays early, and he's a guy that can play inside or out. He would be very dangerous as a slot. You can play him outside because he can get off bump and run coverage. Very good football player.
So even more on Jayvan Boggs, and plus I finally pay off the big picture discussion of Missouri football recruiting with Brian here in a little bit. Is this a sustainable moment for the Tigers or not? Let's talk about that here in just a little bit. First, though, we got to talk FanDuel, because as much as I love sports and I never want them to stop, I have to admit, as the NBA playoffs have winded down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsin' just like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets at any time I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Again, to me, you want to play the Tigers, play them to make the college football playoff plus 180. But regardless of what you're into, you got to hit FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Yeah, that's totally true, and that kind of goes to my point about, I think they're both technicians. A lot of that is, I thought, boy, good luck playing Boggs in bump and run coverage. I saw them do that. I mean, if you just have those quick feet off the line, bumping a guy is much easier said than done. That's for darn sure. But, just one thing here, just a bigger picture thing here, Brian, and I'll get you out of here. Appreciate your time as always. But so these recent recruits here, we've talked a lot about, not just me, but everybody in Mizzou Nation here is talking about, hey, the word is unprecedented, what is happening with Mizzou football recruiting right now. And a lot of maybe the bigger time sort of blue bloods, if you will, the Florida States, for example, like Brian is the host of Locked On Seminoles, for example. Well, I think a lot of those schools, Oklahoma, for example, would say, this is just a blip on the radar. Do you think this is a blip on the radar? Do you think this is a sign of something sustainable for Missouri, at least as long as Eli Drinkwitz is around?
I think it's the latter. It's sustainable because they started to show signs of it last year. And then all through the spring, everybody saw that their name was popping up with more national kids. Texas, Florida, etc. Now, I don't know how long it'll last to this level. Like the last week or so is about as good as it's going to get, I would imagine. Boggs and kids like that, you can only get so many guys.
Sure.
But at the same time, these are kids that had offers from major SEC, Big Ten programs, Notre Dame, etc. Either you did or you didn't. So A, it's happened, and B, they're still in on more guys.
Right.
It's not like they're in on 4 guys and it's hit the inside straight here. They're going to be a top 20 recruiting team moving forward. The key for Missouri, and this is what fans need to pay attention to, out of all the kids they have committed right now, you can argue whichever one's the most important, but it's the linemen. Again, if you're going to compete with LSU, Bama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, those 5 programs over the last 20 years, you go look at the first-round picks on the offensive and defensive line, and they look who finished high in the polls, they go together. Those schools do a great job. And not that SC or Texas or Notre Dame doesn't, but those 5 are probably the best. Florida
Right.
State, when they were up, when they won it in 2013, they had a couple of D linemen, O linemen that were really good. Those things matter. If they can continue to get Lamont Rogers kind of players,
Right.
they can consistently compete with those teams. Like Missouri was close with Georgia last year, but they just had more depth in the trenches. The other thing is they got to get more D linemen. They're on the cusp, but to get over the top, it's the hardest thing. It's getting those elite guys. But in my life, it is by far the best Missouri's ever recruited. And I don't see it really stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, and to your point, certainly while Missouri hasn't recruited like this before on paper, the best Missouri team so far in the SEC, no doubt the 2013 Tigers that won the SEC East, came up short in the title game against Auburn. But no doubt, offensive line, that's the best Missouri offensive line I've ever seen. Maybe the best Missouri defensive line I've ever seen, too. They had a couple of guys who went in the first at least couple rounds of the draft there, and Shane Ray and Marcus Golden, other notable players like Michael Sam and a bunch of other guys, too. So I think that is totally to your point, Brian. If Missouri, if it is going to be a sustainable thing and not just a blip on the radar, I think it does kind of come down to those linemen. If we keep recruiting those big boys with those type of teams that you mentioned, I think it absolutely is sustainable. But hey, Brian, thanks as always for joining me here on the podcast. You can find Brian on X at FB_Scout_Florida, and of course the host of the Locked On Seminoles podcast as well. Brian Smith, appreciate your time as always, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, and thanks to Brian Smith for his time. As always, next week on the show, a big week here at Locked On Mizzou, coming back 5 days a week starting July 15th. Of course, well, you've got Mizzou, you've got college football, the new video game coming out next week. Of course, SEC Media Days. You're going to have Burden, Cook, Eli, Christian Williams, all taking the podium and lectern down in Dallas. I'll have all that for you next week right here on Locked On Mizzou.